Steve Rogers is indeed back in the upcoming Avengers Doomsday, 7 years after his story arc ended with his return as an old man. A return that left countless questions unanswered. Where was he? How is he so old? Where did that shield come from that we had never seen before? And above all, did he really bring back the stones? So many questions left unanswered by the Russo brothers and the writers Stephen McFeely and Christopher Marcus, who, at the time of the film's release, couldn't even agree among themselves on what had really happened. For the directors, Steve had obviously ended up in an alternate reality and came back to the main universe without really explaining how. While the screenwriters, on the other hand, thought he had stayed in the same universe as the Avengers, the 616, implying that there would have been two captains at the same time. A script mess that they passed on to those who were going to develop the Multiverse saga, but it was never resolved. Not ever until now. Because the Russo brothers decided to use Avengers Endgame as the trigger for all the multiversal mess that leads us to Doomsday. According to them, this movie can't be made without Steve Rogers. Worse, he would be a major element of the ongoing multiversal crisis. And since no one has ever tackled it, and the re-release of Avengers Endgame in theaters is explicitly announced to create the key bridges between Endgame and Doomsday, they have no choice anymore. They'll have to explain what really happened during all those years, whether he was able to return the stones or not, but most importantly, how, and the real impact it had on the multiverse. And guess what? That's exactly the investigation we're going to conduct today, because there are several theories related to the different rules applied to the multiverse and time travel that we need to clarify. That's why we're now entering the spoiler zone, the zone of all dangers. You're with Kevin Bookhart, your favorite theorist's favorite theorist. Opening credits. The rules of the MCU. In 2019, Avengers Endgame marked the conclusion of 11 years of the MCU centered around the Infinity Stones, a conclusion that could very well have ended as the final chapter. The one where we would never have had to ask any more questions about the consequences, except the movie makes its big comeback to introduce a new conclusion. That of the Multiverse saga? And this conclusion won't rely on everything the MCU has produced since Endgame, but rather on the time heist and its consequences. We've already talked in the past about how Steve Rogers and the Avengers are the primary ones responsible for the destruction of the multiverse, for the rise of Doom and Battleworld. But today we're going to focus on another aspect of this time travel, the one where the Avengers as usual try to fix what they've broken, without ever really succeeding. Because yes, returning the stones exactly at the moment they took them seems like a great plan, except in reality, it's not that simple. First, because time travel doesn't work like that, because Loki laid the foundations for multiversal branches. But also because Captain doesn't return the stones in the form they were found at all, and we'll see that this has a huge impact on the consequences in each timeline. But before we get started, we need to understand how all this works. Time travel is explained several times in Endgame, first by Hulk. Without knowing the rules of multiversal branches, Bruce and Nebula explain that traveling to the past and changing it doesn't alter the timeline you came from.
If you travel to the past, that past becomes your future. And your previous present becomes the past, which now can't be changed by your new future.
In other words, just because they remove a stone from the past doesn't mean that stone no longer exists in the present. No, it creates an alternate timeline the moment the stone is taken for that timeline. Their future is changed, but not our present.
So Back to the Future is a bunch of bullshit?
Exactly.
This information is later confirmed to Bruce by the Ancient One. Removing the stone will completely alter the fate of their reality, which was originally supposed to be the same as that of the Avengers.
The time continuum has been disrupted, creating this new temporal event sequence resulting in this alternate reality.
English, Doc.
Here's an example from a diagram from the Loki series. It's explained quite well. The Avengers go back into the past of their own timeline, but as soon as they remove the stone, a branch starts to form. Well, it's a bit contradictory to what actually happens in the movie. Since their mere presence makes them enter a new branch, and normally they shouldn't be able to just travel in their own timeline anymore, unless they use, for example, technology that also travels between universes. But who knows, maybe it's something they have without knowing it since they're traveling with a time GPS, and so the starting point is necessarily the return point. You see what I mean? Kind of like the TVA's time pads. Every point in time on every universe or branch is a coordinate. Sure, the TVA knows them all, but the Avengers only know theirs, so they can return to that exact time and place without knowing exactly how to go anywhere else. You got it, in short? All this brings us to the Loki series, which takes the concept further. The rest of Loki, with the Tesseract, has therefore created a new branch. A branch that the TVA immediately comes to erase, because even though Loki's presence was necessary for He Who Remains, apparently the branch that created him is not. Unlike perhaps all the other branches. In Loki, we learn that the eternal flow of time, or the sacred timeline, is the only universe allowed to exist. So, we see that at that moment, there isn't just one universe, since many branches follow this timeline, but they all go in the same direction. They all have the same beginning and the same end, without creating major divergences. Basically, we have the main Avengers universe and a whole bunch of branches with tiny divergences that exist in parallel. For example, this is where Sylvie, the female variant of Loki, takes refuge after getting rid of He Who Remains at the end of Season 1. An event that leads the TVA to stop intervening to prevent Nexus events. These are key differentiating points that create new branches that completely break away, with some even becoming entirely different universes. But Season 2 of Loki goes even further. The end of the TVA's intervention does lead to the expansion of the eternal timeline, but it's not this that creates a complete multiverse. To contain this so-called multiverse, He Who Remains created the Time Loom. This machine absorbs and condenses the remnants of the multiverse. In other words, if there is no multiverse outside of 616 at that moment, it's because of this machine. When Loki decides to let it be destroyed and takes its place on the throne to become the god of stories, he allows the multiverse to exist, which instantly creates an infinity of universes. And that changes everything, because this is where incursions begin. Probably the most important concept for Doomsday. An incursion is when two timelines, two universes, two Earths collide. Reed Richards from Earth 838 actually explains this to Doctor Strange.
An incursion happens when the boundary between the two universes weakens, destroying one or both of them, okay?
But it's in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania that it's the most visually explicit. When Kong explains to Janet what's really happening, we can see branches from multiple universes colliding. And the truth is, by freeing the multiverse from its unstable state, well, Loki set its end in motion, but it's the various actions of the people in those universes that sped things up. For example, from what we know, Wanda with dreamwalking eroded the boundary with the universes she visited, and Peter with Strange's spell. Doctor Strange traveling with America Chavez across universes, or like Monica Rambeau, literally crossing into another universe during an incursion. But above all, what really sped things up was the Avengers time travel. Because you have to understand one thing, time doesn't work at all the same way between the TVA and the timelines. It's a pocket universe completely disconnected from time and space. Time does flow there in a linear way, but the TVA observes the timelines of every universe and is able to access any point as it wishes. What I mean by that is, before Loki's escape, the multiverse wasn't freed. There was only the eternal flow of time and its few branches, and the moment Loki joins the TVA, then it exists and may even have always existed, which fundamentally changes the Avengers' plans. You'll see, you now have the three most important concepts to understand what's next: how time works, how branches work, and what incursions cause, so we can move forward. Let's now go back to the Avengers' supposedly perfect plan, to borrow the stones in the past and return them as if nothing ever happened. Well, in theory, because when I rewatched the movie, I realized that at no point do they actually discuss bringing them back. Bruce and the Ancient One discuss it in 2012, but it's only mentioned again at the end when Bruce reminds Steve.
Yeah, that's it. That's alternative realities.
So nobody really thought about how it was actually going to work. And Tony, the only one who truly understands time travel, well, isn't there anymore to help them understand. He just entrusts the mission to the one who has always done what was right, sending him into the line of fire hoping it works, Steve Rogers. But then, knowing all that, what could have happened when it was time to return the stones? The three theories of the return. Well, at that point, for them as for us, it's clear that this journey is purely theoretical, to the point that, as I was saying, the directors and the writers themselves never really tried to explain it. They return the stones, leave, and that's it. But for me, there are actually three possibilities for Steve when he goes back to the exact point of each stone's heist. The first is the one the movie itself showed us, the intervention of the TVA. Each time a stone is taken, it creates a new branch, but at that moment, the TVA is still very much active. So, exactly as they did when they captured Loki, they capture everyone the Avengers made deviate from their destiny, judge them, and erase their branches. In other words, in this option, Captain comes back exactly where the Avengers arrived during their heist, a past where the stones are there and absolutely nothing has changed. These actions might in turn cause new branches, but they will constantly be cut off by the TVA. This is actually the theory that fits best with the rumor that Loki came to move Steve to Universe 828. Because, according to several insiders, Loki, during his time wandering, supposedly took the time to save Steve and Peggy before the TVA came to disrupt their universe by sending them to a universe where they wouldn't exist. I still hate this rumor, but it fits this theory perfectly. But then, what did he do with the stones and Mjolnir, since they're the result of branches that no longer exist? I have no idea. Maybe he buried them or threw them in a lake, I don't know. But for the sake of the Doomsday storyline, and even if it's the most logical one given what we know from Endgame today, there's little chance that this option will be developed. Unless the Avengers need a second Mjolnir and the stones to defeat Doom. So let's move on to the second option, linear time travel. Well, this option is basically the same as the first one, except that this time, the branches created in Endgame aren't erased. This time, we'll assume that Loki's actions were immediate, instantaneous, and that the TVA only erased Loki's actions before letting all the other universes thrive in the new multiverse. But then, why couldn't Steve fix his branches? Well, in theory, if we follow what Bruce and Nebula explained, it's not really possible to go back into the past. You can only travel in your own timeline, which becomes your own future. It's complicated, I know, hang on. Basically, Steve can't go back to the moment when the Avengers did their heist, since that's their past, and that past created new branches. Every time he travels into his past, he's not traveling into an alternate past, just into the same unaltered timeline. Well, yeah, if when they steal the stones it doesn't alter the present, then it means their past never changed. So, when Steve goes back into his past, he doesn't change anything for himself either. To return to where he stole the stones, he would have to change universes, or at least branches, which only Kong and the TVA seem able to do today, not the Avengers. So for Steve, the result is the same. Realizing that he's powerless and can't return to the present to share the news, he decides to take advantage of this physical reality to choose a time period and create a new branch to live with Peggy. But then the branches they created, what happened to them? Well, probably not very fun things. Let's take them one by one. Let's start with 2014. 2 stones are targeted here, and just like the rest, their disappearance will probably cause 2 different branches. First of all, Morag. Peter Quill wakes up on a planet where the orb has disappeared. They return empty-handed to the Ravagers, but this universe seems fine after the disappearance. Without the stone, Ronan the Accuser is no longer a threat to the Xandarian Empire. The Guardians will never form, that's true. But above all, one thing completely changes the fate of this timeline. The total disappearance of Thanos and his entire army. So the universe will never know the snap, and Ronan is even less of a threat without the support of the Mad Titan. By the way, none of these universes will ever know the threat of Thanos, since one of the stones is missing. That's the case with Vormir. After the disappearance of the Soul Stone, Red Skull may be freed from the curse. But it's hard to say if this universe will fare better than Morag's, since the Soul Stone is the one that allows the gauntlet to make half the universe's souls disappear, almost mercifully. Without it, Thanos might simply be a genocidal maniac. And above all, Red Skull is now back, probably more vengeful than ever. Alright, let's move on to Asgard 2013. Without the Ether, the Dark Elves pose no threat, and the Asgardian army defeats them. Loki remains in prison, and both his parents survive. But now, the universe no longer has a Thor with his hammer, which will probably lead him to become king much earlier, and who knows, maybe even defeat Thanos in turn, with all the power of the Odin Force. Yeah, the most interesting stuff still happens in New York, and it's 3 stones. Yes, 3 in the same place at the same time. We can rule out the Space Stone, since Loki's escape disrupted its timeline. Either way, that stone disappeared. Here, no Space Stone, no Mind Stone, and no more Time Stone. It's pretty simple. This universe ends up in total confusion. Anything can happen, but overall, it's probably Dormammu who will doom it in the first year, since Strange won't be able to use the Time Stone to defeat him. Dormammu, I've come to bargain. Finally, Camp Lehigh. Without the Tesseract, there would be no Project Pegasus, no creation of Captain Marvel, and probably no attack on Earth by Thanos and Loki. And above all, no Avengers project. And besides, maybe Iron Man would never exist since Howard Stark would never study the Tesseract and therefore wouldn't develop the very first arc reactor. The biggest threat might be a Kree invasion and an Asgard-Kree war on Earth without any heroes to defend it. In short, universes with different destinies, but all of them will create incursions and many other universes. But let's be honest, if the MCU ever explains how the time heist messed up the multiverse and led to the creation of Doom, they'll have to show that Steve really did return the stones. And it's in this third theory that things get interesting. The return of the stones. There were long-standing plans to develop a project about Steve returning the stones, a project called Nomad, a series or a film dedicated to that mysterious moment left unresolved. The project was ultimately cancelled. Why? Probably to give the directors in charge of the next Avengers the freedom to use it or not. With Avengers, Kang Dynasty, once set to be directed by Destiny Daniel Cretton, now cancelled, the Russo brothers are returning and likely requested to continue directly from Endgame. So definitely don't start this project before they return. So, why am I saying this? Throughout their interviews in the months after announcing their return, they consistently expressed that. Stephen McFeely, one of the creators and screenwriters of all of Captain's adventures in the movies, agreed to come back after finding the right idea, the one that got everyone excited. And now we know it's probably this duel between Doom and the consequences of Steve's actions. So I think theory number 3 will probably be the one chosen, the one where Steve really did bring back the stones and the hammer, but let's see what that could look like. And above all, what it tells us about the man he has become. Because this mission isn't just a formality, it's 5 impossible decisions, 5 universes where Steve will have to choose alone, with no one to challenge him. Without Tony, without Natasha, without anyone to tell him there's another way, and each choice will leave a mark on the universes. Yes, on them, but also on him. Let's start with Vormir, that's where it all begins. Steve waits for Rhodey to leave, and by staying a bit longer, he understands what happened. Nebula, Thanos, the Titan who left his own time to arrive in the Avengers universe. First dilemma, and it's a huge one. Should he send Nebula back before Thanos arrives and risk disrupting the entire timeline, or let Thanos take her and accept that this universe will experience what it was meant to? Each choice ultimately leads to an unknown outcome. So of course he has the power to save Tony? Maybe. Or he could fail at the very first step. Let's say he lets Thanos leave and arrive on the 616. Steve can't afford to mess with timelines he doesn't control. Except that while he's putting back the Power Stone, Ronan's forces intervene, and yes, they arrived right after. He gets the orb, giving Ronan the power of the stone to unleash on Xandar. And without Gamora and Nebula, who traveled with Thanos, Quill will never get caught and will never meet the Guardians. No one to stand against Ronan. The Kree Empire enters a new era of domination. And Ego, for his part, will eventually find Peter, maybe not as easily, but this time with no Guardians to stop him. The Living Planet's expansion engulfs part of the universe. And the only good news is that the original Groot will probably stay alive, but well, Rocket will also probably end up captured and tortured by the High Evolutionary with no one to save him. First mission, not great, and Steve already understands one thing. He thought he could restore order, he just realized he caused another mess. For the first time in his life, his good intentions aren't enough. He heads to Vormir feeling a bit down. And that's when everything changes for him. He finds Natasha's body at the foot of the mountain. He climbs up and comes face to face with his first enemy, Red Skull. Here, there's no reprieve. Steve arrives a few seconds after Natasha's sacrifice, and he realizes that through the curse, Red Skull has gained a form of clairvoyance, a divine clairvoyance. Remember, he is able to identify every person who comes before him by stating the name of one of their parents.
Natasha, daughter of Ivan, Clint, son of Edith.
Even if they themselves didn't know them, like Natasha. So there's a good chance that Red Skull already knows Steve's plans and that they're waiting for him to warn him. Yes, his quest will destroy more lives than it will save, but concretely, what could really happen here? Is Steve negotiating for Natasha's life? Does he, in turn, have to sacrifice something to return the stone? Or maybe, quite simply, he tries. One thing is certain. If Red Skull predicts the future for him, Steve decided not to listen since he went on and lived his life with Peggy, as we saw. A choice that will clearly come at a high price. But all of this is just speculation here. We're just having fun. Alright, let's head to Asgard in 2013. Well, the first 2 stones were relatively easy to return. At least they were in the same form as when they were taken. But on Asgard, it's different. The Reality Stone is in the form of ether. Worse, it was inside Jane Foster's body when Rocket stole it. And that's not an easy situation to explain. So Steve will probably do the simplest thing, return the hammer and the stone directly to Thor, and move on. Yeah, except that actually changes everything. Without the ether, the Dark Elves don't stand a chance. Frigga stays alive. Odin isn't replaced by Loki and Ragnarok never happens. And yeah, Thanos probably doesn't attack. Well, not right away, because as long as Odin rules, he doesn't dare. Just look at it. As soon as Asgard fell in Ragnarok, the Titan rushed to the Nova Core to get the Power Stone and went after what was left of the Asgardian people. Everything happened very quickly after Odin's fall. Except that in this timeline, Loki doesn't know the consequences of his betrayal that leads to his mother's death, nor the moments from Ragnarok that bring him closer to Thor. So he remains a villain who might do anything to redeem himself with Thanos and maybe even help him infiltrate Asgard to take the stones, just like he normally does with the Dark Elves. Starting the Mad Titans plan differently. Especially since without Ragnarok no one brings Hulk home, so no one warns Strange and Tony that Thanos is coming. The invasion is easier, no one helps or has access to time travel. Another Avenger has to do the snap to bring everyone back. We can say it, probably Thor will be the one who comes out really hurt. Yes, he wasn't made for that, unlike Hulk. After that, anything is possible. Without Thor in the final battle, Thanos defeats the Avengers and destroys this reality, which causes countless incursions. In short, it's a mess. Failed again. And Steve at this point just realized the second thing. Not only that his choices have consequences, but actually, there is no right choice, that the Savior's way, the one he's lived his whole life by, doesn't work anymore. Because in every universe, saving someone actually means condemning someone else. It's all a matter of balance, and they're the ones who doomed all these realities. Alright, here's New York 2012. Hold on. Like I was saying, the reality erased by the TVA is probably not the same as the others, simply because when Loki escapes, his reality is instantly scrambled. We can see Tony, Scott, and Steve just hanging out while deciding what to do, so this branch is likely different. Yeah, I know, it doesn't make sense, but Steve has to bring the Space Stone back to 1970, not 2012. So on that point, I don't have an answer for how it works. Good luck to them. So, we're going to keep it simple. The Time Stone. After Bruce leaves, Steve arrives and gives it back to the Ancient One. What? For once it worked? Yes and no, because now the Ancient One knows she can have absolute trust in Strange. He is the savior she hoped he would be, which means that when Stephen Strange comes to ask her to teach him, to heal him, she might not be as hard on him, which will only make him more arrogant. But most importantly, she might not say the words to him that change everything.
It's not about you.
I mean this specific Stephen, because we've seen that across the multiverse. Strange has a certain tendency to go off the rails, to let himself be corrupted, to do all sorts of reckless things. So, I'm not trying to be completely negative, but it might still be complicated, because the slightest flap of a wing creates a butterfly effect. Then comes the moment to return the Mind Stone, except it's no longer in the scepter. And here, Steve knows that S.H.I.E.L.D. is corrupted by Hydra. Then comes another very complicated dilemma for him. Should he return the stone to S.H.I.E.L.D. despite the consequences, or give it to Thor? He avoids Ultron and the Avengers breaking up, but also prevents Vision and Wanda's creation. And it's in this kind of impossible choice that we understand the plan can't work. Even if Steve accepts that returning the stones will cause many problems, just returning them in their raw state changes everything. If Hydra gets the stone, their plan accelerates. If Steve gives it to Tony, Ultron might be worse. If Asgard keeps it and gives it to the Collector, what about the Ether? And the chronological consistency of this universe is already tainted. Hydra agents in S.H.I.E.L.D. now believe Captain is one of them. The Captain in this universe will likely uncover secrets like the Winter Soldier much sooner. In short, this universe is already off track. And Steve, he just realized a third thing. That every stone returned, well, it's another life sacrificed. That the mission he was given isn't a rescue mission, it's a sorting mission, and he didn't sign up for that. It's time to return to the moment that changed everything for him, when he saw Peggy again. And always the same problem. It's impossible to recreate the Tesseract. Steve just has to put the stone back where he found it. But once again, the power of the stone is no longer contained in an artifact. So Zola and Stark now have access to all the power of the stone. This might speed up S.H.I.E.L.D.'s weapons program and therefore Hydra's domination of the world. It could even push Thanos to attack much earlier. After all, Loki and he have hundreds, even thousands of years, or maybe the opposite. The stone gives humanity a power capable of pushing back all outside forces. Captain Marvel will certainly never be created, but just like Asgard before them, the power of the stone will allow humanity to travel through space, create unlimited energy, and get closer to the technology of other space civilizations. Well, you get it, this is all pure fiction. Everything I just told you could happen completely differently. But one thing is certain. Unlike what Hulk thought, it's almost impossible to simply bring the stones back without impacting the timelines they come from. This mission is inevitably a failure, and it creates countless new branches leading to the erosion of the multiverse. And it's precisely at that moment that Steve makes the only real choice he's made since he started his mission. He decides not to come back. A life for Steve. In the first teaser for Avengers Doomsday, shown before Avatar 3, we saw the first images of Steve Rogers in his new life. Over time, we managed to identify that the scenes took place over several years, even in different locations. But one of the most striking elements is the scene where Steve puts away his suit. It's already confirmed by CinemaCon attendees that he won't wear the suit again in Doomsday. Steve is in the Fantastic Four's ship wearing civilian clothes with a longer beard and appearing older than in the teaser. And that's important because this last mission marks the end of his role, his status, his symbol, and yet, at that moment, he hasn't passed the role on to Sam yet. He probably doesn't even know he'll do it one day. So this mission was tough. Nothing was forcing him to hang up the suit. So, to say that he's no longer worthy, I don't know, since the trailer shows that he's still worthy, it's hard to deny it, but it seems that even if he comes back to save the multiverse, well, he won't do it in his uniform. But then, where did Steve go at the end of this mission? Let's stick to the idea that he can only go back. That's why in my timeline, I started from 2014, then 2013, 2012, and 1970. Each time he returns, he revisits a moment from his story or the Avengers' history. So he probably goes back to the end of the war or even directly to his missed date. That's a key element in the whole story between Peggy and Steve. That dance he promises during the crash, the one he sees in his vision, is one of the many factors that will push Steve to make this decision. First, Tony, who tells him to try to live that life, but also Peggy and Winter Soldier, who tells him that sometimes the best thing to do is to start over. Steve has seen his mission fail, or at least distort every universe he has touched, and now, in front of him, there is a door, a life that has been waiting for him for 70 years. Well, he decides to take it. But this decision raises a lot of questions. First, why would Loki come and relocate him? Does he know that Steve will have an important role in what's coming to defeat Doom? Like Strange, he realized saving Tony was crucial to defeating Thanos. So many questions that we don't have answers to yet. And maybe that's exactly what makes Steve's return so intriguing. He didn't come back by chance. He comes back because several forces that we don't yet understand have decided that his presence is necessary to the Doomsday equation. But then, what is going to push him to get back in action? Because Steve saw it, he actually has very little impact when it comes to fixing the consequences of the heist and the Avengers. And as Tony told him so well, if you mess with time, it tends to mess back. You'll see. He knew their actions would have consequences, as usual with the Avengers. Still, they didn't seem too concerned when it was time to return the stones. Why would he think he could make a difference this time? My guess is that it all comes down to Doom. It's Victor Von Doom who will convince him to come back. Because Steve, in his new universe, probably left all that behind. He started a family, lived a life. He might have even put his failures aside. Maybe he never even talked about it with Peggy. But the consequences come back, and Doom is there to remind him. What's happening, the multiversal catastrophe, maybe even the destruction of Doom's family, are the direct consequences of his choices. He has to come back once again to make up for his mistakes, those of the Avengers, but maybe most importantly, to save his family. Now, there's one thing that the Endgame rewrite is going to have a hard time explaining. How and why is Captain back as an old man at that moment? To this day, it's still one of the hardest things for me to figure out. Clearly, Captain lived a part of his life with Peggy. They had a child who seems to be grown up by the time of Doomsday. Yes, he'll likely be part of the end of the multiverse, battle Doom, and fight in the secret wars on Battleworld. This is probably where he's going to get Sam's shield to give it to him. But how is he going to end up being so old? He doesn't seem particularly affected when he talks to Sam. So I don't think his life energy or his serum was absorbed by Doom, which means he's not only from the Secret Wars era, but possibly from way after that. Or maybe that's just the simplest explanation. The Secret Wars storyline will show us that in this new world rebuilt by the heroes, Steve is allowed to grow old with Peggy in the 616 universe, and not on a world where he doesn't belong. We ultimately arrive at the same ending for the character as what Endgame was supposed to do, which would be weird, but it actually seems more logical. As if in this new world, he had never been captain. Basically, that this Steve after Secret Wars was allowed to live in this timeline at the same time as the captain from that era. Finally becoming the real husband, the one you never see in photos next to Peggy. You know, the famous husband that Steve saved in the report. Explaining that he didn't travel the multiverse to get here, but just waited for the right moment. The moment where it all began, the one where he left his own timeline and started this mission, to finally come back and give the shield to Sam. Well, that's a lot of ifs. But sometimes that's also what's fun about going full fanfic and seeing how much of it ends up lining up with reality. Let me remind you that Avengers Endgame returns in September with new scenes connecting the two Russo brothers projects. I think everything will be revealed then. And personally, I can't wait. Alright, let me know what you think in the comments and how you see Steve's journey. If you enjoyed it and you're not part of the Kevin Bookart yet, now's the time. Subscribe, it's free and it helps the channel.